In the depths of space, where darkness is not the absence of light, but a separate form of matter, there is an object that violates all known laws of stability of worlds. It does not revolve around a star, does not receive energy from the solar wind, and does not depend on external radiation. And yet its surface burns as if there is an inextinguishable source of heat hidden inside, capable of burning through space itself. This world moves alone, breaking off the orbital bonds of its system, even at the moment when the gravitational forces of a more massive neighbor pushed it into the interstellar void. Since then, it has not belonged to a single star, no cluster, no gravitational center. He became a wanderer who had lost his direction, but retained an inner energy that should not exist without an external source. And yet it exists. Its surface is constantly flashing, not as flames familiar within planetary atmospheres, but as deep, layered bursts of energy bursting from the inside out. The temperature on its dark side does not drop to absolute cold, as is expected in the void of space. It remains high, stable, as if the vacuum around it itself is not able to take away heat. The cause of this phenomenon is hidden deep under the bark, where familiar geological structures turn into unstable layers of molten compounds. There is a constant release of decay energy. Radioactive elements trapped in the dense matter of the nucleus have entered into a chain reaction that does not fade away. But this is not the usual decay known in terrestrial planet systems. Here, the processes are accelerated, as if matter itself has lost its ability to balance. Each layer of the internal structure of this planet becomes a source of its own heat. The lower horizons press on the upper horizons, creating a colossal tension. And this tension does not dissipate. It is converted into luminous energy, which breaks through the cracks, forming giant faults of light on the surface. These faults do not overgrow, they expand, as if the planet itself were striving to reveal itself to emptiness. There is no atmosphere around it in the usual sense. Gases exist, but they are not held uniformly. They burst into space, forming thin, constantly changing shells of ionized particles. These shells flare up when they collide with streams of cosmic radiation and create the effect of a constant glow, visible at great distances.
The light of this world is not reflected or borrowed. It is born inside. And this makes it especially unusual among all known objects in space. Sometimes the surface of this body is covered with waves of hot matter, which move slowly but inexorably. These waves are not like the tectonic movements of ordinary planets. They resemble the breath of a gigantic structure, where each impulse is a redistribution of energy looking for an outlet. And there is no stability in this movement. There is only a constant striving for redistribution, which never reaches equilibrium.
The emptiness around increases the effect of the loneliness of this world. There are no nearby stars that could influence its climate. There are no gravitational perturbations that could stabilize its orbit. It moves along its own trajectory, slowly retreating into unknown regions of the galaxy, where the density of matter is so low that even light loses direction. But even in this emptiness, it continues to burn. Scientists in the cosmos call such objects self-heating planets, although this name does not reflect the true nature of the phenomenon. After all, there is no simple heating here. Here there is a process in which matter becomes a source of its own energy, without the need for external influence. some layers of the surface exhibit strange behavior. They glow even after destruction. When the cracks open too wide, pieces of bark separate but continue to radiate heat until they finally disintegrate. This means that the energy process is built not only into the structure, but also into the very form of matter.
In the depths of this world, there are zones where the pressure reaches such values at which atomic bonds begin to behave unstable. Matter is not destroyed there instantaneously. It passes into states that are not described by conventional physics. These zones become sources of powerful bursts of energy that make their way to the surface, creating flashes visible even in infrared observations at great distances. From the outside, these flashes look like continuous pulsations. It is as if the heart, hidden inside a huge dark body, continues to work without stopping, despite the lack of external nourishment. But this is not the heart, and not a mechanism. This is a consequence of the instability of the very structure of the world, which has lost its balance between gravity, heat, and internal reactions. And yet, there is an even stranger detail.
Despite the fact that this object is completely isolated, its movement is not chaotic. It follows a trajectory that indicates the presence of an ancient gravitational interaction. It is as if it was once part of a system where the forces were distributed differently. And even after the breakdown of the ties, it continues to carry the memory of its former orbit. This memory manifests itself in microscopic changes in rotation. The planet slowly but regularly changes the speed of its own revolution. These changes are not related to external influences. They come from within, as if the inner masses are being redistributed in an attempt to restore the lost equilibrium. And the further it goes into the void, the stronger its inner heat becomes.
Sometimes, areas of absolute instability arise on the surface, where matter ceases to be solid. In these places, short-term dips filled with luminous plasma are formed. They open and close without warning, throwing out streams of energy into the surrounding space. These emissions propagate over vast distances, but do not collide with anything. They dissolve in a vacuum, leaving behind only faint traces of radiation. If sound existed in space, these flashes could sound like deep, slow shocks stretched over thousands of kilometers of space. But the cosmos is silent, and therefore everything that happens in this world remains only light, movement, and warmth, which has no witnesses. Over time, its surface begins to change. Old areas of the crust are destroyed faster than new ones have time to stabilize. It creates a sense of constant renewal, but it is actually a process of decay that never ends. Each new layer becomes thinner than the previous one. Each new rift opens up deeper regions where the energy becomes even denser, even brighter, even more dangerous. And at some point, it becomes obvious. This world is not just burning. It gradually turns into a source of its own energy, abandoning the form in which it once existed as an ordinary planet. Its structure no longer belongs to the category of solids. It becomes a transitional state between a planet and a star, but does not reach any of these statuses completely. He is stuck in a process of transformation that has no end. And in this infinity of changes, a new phenomenon is born. A steady glow in the void, which does not go out even when there is nothing around that could support it. And the farther he goes into space, the brighter his inner fire becomes, as if space itself pushes him to the limit, beyond which there would be no form, only pure energy spilled in the darkness.
And at that moment, new cracks begin to open inside the depths, much deeper than all the previous ones. And the light from them becomes so dense that the boundary between the surface and the inner core begins to disappear. And this glow begins to behave as if it no longer belongs to the surface. It is no longer associated with cracks, faults, or internal emissions. It becomes an independent state of matter, spreading not only outward, but also inward, penetrating into the very structure of the planet and rewriting its physical properties. The boundary between what was considered a nucleus and what was considered a shell begins to disappear because energy ceases to obey the usual direction of movement. It does not seek to go out, it seeks to exist everywhere at once. At this point, the planet itself loses its clear shape. Its outer layers are no longer held by gravity in the usual geometry. They begin to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, but continuously, creating a feeling of fluidity, of solid peace. Matter behaves as if it has forgotten that it must remain fixed. And the deeper this process is observed, the clearer it becomes. The holding structure can no longer cope with the internal pressure of energy, which finds no limits. The radiation streams become denser. They cease to be just thermal emissions and begin to resemble stable energy currents that form their own field of activity around the object. This field does not coincide with either magnetic or gravitational field. It exists separately, as a consequence of internal instability, which has reached a critical point and ceased to be local. This state now encompasses the entire object.
And then the strangest thing begins. The rotation of the planet slows down unevenly. Some sections continue to move at the same speed. Others begin to lag behind, as if the different layers are no longer connected to each other. The effect of internal discord arises, in which a single body turns into a system of independent energy fragments, still held together by common gravity, but no longer acting as a single whole. In the depths, zones appear where the temperature reaches such values that the usual forms of matter can no longer exist even for a short time. Neither solid structures nor stable plasma states are formed there. There is only a continuous transformation, where each particle loses its individuality, becoming part of the overall energy flow. These zones expand slowly but inevitably, as if the inner fire is not looking for an outlet, it is looking for space to fully spread.
From the outside, this manifests itself as a change in luminosity. Previously, it was chaotic, flaring up and fading, but now it is becoming smooth, deep, almost stable. The light ceases to flicker and begins to exist as a single field that encompasses the entire object. This is no longer a series of flashes, but a constant state of radiation that does not depend on local processes. It is at this point that it becomes obvious that the usual understanding of the planet no longer applies. It is not a body in space. This is a process that continues in the form of an object that still retains mass, but has already lost the stability of the structure. It no longer belongs to the category of solid worlds, but it has not reached the state of a star where energy completely dominates matter. He is between these states, but this between is not a transition. It is a stable existence in a gap that does not close.
The emptiness around us has no effect, but it does not remain neutral either. It begins to interact with this object through subtle changes in radiation. The light emanating from it is not scattered evenly. It seems to condense in certain directions, creating faint curvatures in space that cannot be attributed to either gravity or optical effects. These are new forms of matter-vacuum interactions,
that occur where energy reaches its density limit in an unstable structure. And as this process continues, it becomes noticeable that the inner layers no longer lift energy to the surface. They no longer need a surface. The whole body begins to work as a single generator, where each point of space inside the object is simultaneously the source, the path of propagation, and the final result. The cycle no longer has a direction. It closes in on itself, turning into a continuous state.
Matter gradually loses its usual density. It becomes distributed, as if the structure no longer fixes the position of the particles, but only holds the probability of their existence. This causes the shape of the object to become less and less definite. The boundaries begin to blur, but do not disappear completely. They turn into transition zones, where energy and matter exist in an equilibrium that is not stable, but stable over time. And in this state, another shift occurs. The energy that used to destroy the structure begins to support it, not in the sense of restoration, but in the sense of keeping the process of decay in a constant form. Destruction ceases to be an event and becomes a state. The planet is no longer destroyed or preserved. It exists as a continuous change recorded in a single object.
Over time, it becomes clear that this world can no longer stop. Any slowdown in internal processes does not lead to cooling, but to the redistribution of energy to other areas, where the temperature rises again. Any attempt at stabilization only changes the form of instability, but does not eliminate it. And then the final understanding arises. This object does not move towards the star and does not move away from it. It does not evolve in the usual sense. It exists as a separate class of cosmic phenomena, a world that has chosen infinite burning as a form of existence, where energy itself is not the result of processes, but their sole cause. And in this state, it continues to drift in the void, leaving behind it not a trace of destruction or light, but of a long-lasting, stable presence of energy, which needs neither a source, nor a direction, nor an end.
And the farther this object goes into the interstellar void, the more its interaction with space itself changes. The vacuum around it ceases to be an absolutely neutral background. It begins to react to constant radiation, as if space itself is gradually readjusting its properties under the influence of continuous energy pressure. There is a subtle area around the world where the usual parameters of emptiness no longer correspond to the usual values. There, the behavior of particles changes. Energy is distributed differently. Even darkness ceases to be homogeneous there. In this zone, an effect appears that is not similar to either gravitational lensing or magnetic anomalies. Light passing nearby is slightly deflected, but not in the same way as it is under the influence of mass. It seems to be lagging in space, lingering near the object for a fraction of a moment longer than it should, as if the very geometry of time around it is becoming denser.
This is not a fixed distortion, but a constant, fluid change, due to the fact that the energy inside the object never reaches equilibrium. Internal processes also continue to become more complicated. Those zones where matter has almost lost its structure begin to form new, stable radiation nodes. These nodes are not nuclei in the usual sense, but behave like centers of local activity, where energy is collected, held, and redistributed throughout the inner layers. The result is a network that does not have a center, but at the same time functions as if there is a center at every point at the same time. And at some point, this network begins to affect the shape of the object itself. Instead of one solid body, a complex system of energy directions appears inside the planet, where the density of matter is already secondary. It is not the mass that becomes the main one, but the structure of the movement of energy. And this structure gradually displaces the usual geology, replacing it with the dynamics of flows that do not obey the usual logic of the layers.
From the surface, this manifests itself as a change in the nature of the glow. It ceases to be uniform, even in its new stable state. There are areas where the light becomes deeper, almost denser, and areas where it seems to thin out, going into translucent oscillations. These differences are not accidental. They reflect the internal restructuring of the power grid, which continues to look for new ways to redistribute the load. At the same time, the planet itself looks less and less like a spherical body. Its shape begins to slowly deform, not losing its integrity, but losing symmetry. Some areas become more elongated, others more compressed, as if internal energy flows create their own geometry that does not coincide with the gravitational one. And gravity, despite its strength, is no longer the only factor holding its shape.
The speed of these changes is small, but constant. There is not a single moment when the structure really stops. Even seemingly stable areas of the surface are in a state of microscopic motion, where each particle participates in a continuous rearrangement of the overall energy field. This is not destruction or growth. It is a permanent transformation without direction. And as this process deepens, it becomes noticeable that the radiation of the object begins to go beyond the usual ranges. It becomes multi-layered, encompassing not only the thermal spectrum, but also deeper forms of energy that do not interact with matter in the usual way. These radiations are not completely scattered in space. They leave a trail that persists over vast distances, as if space remembers the passage of that object.
Sometimes structures resembling wave patterns appear in these traces, but they are not stable. They appear and disappear without repeating themselves and never form stable forms. This is a side effect of the constant release of energy from an unstable system that no longer has a clear boundary between internal and external. And at this point, it becomes obvious that the object is no longer just a source of energy. It has become a process that spreads through space not only as radiation, but also as a change in the conditions of the very space around it. It does not just burn, it rewrites the local laws of the behavior of matter in its vicinity.
The further movement of this world is becoming slower and slower from the point of view of external observation. But time does not slow down inside it. It continues to flow in the same unstable rhythm, where each change causes a new redistribution of energy. And the more time passes, the more there is a tendency for the distinction between inside and outside states to disappear. Gradually, the boundary becomes not a line or a surface, but a transitional process which itself is part of the overall system. And in this transition, the very idea of a detached object disappears. All that remains is a continuous field of activity, moving in the void where there was once a planet. But now there is not a form, but a state. Not a body, but a long, endless burning that has neither beginning nor end.
And this burning continues to change. It is no longer related to temperature in the usual sense. The space around the object heats up unevenly, as if energy no longer spreads according to the laws of heat transfer, but acts through the very structure of the vacuum. In some areas near this world, temperatures rise unexpectedly without direct contact with radiation. In others, on the contrary, the energy seems to disappear, absorbed by the invisible layers of the unstable field surrounding the object. An even deeper transformation continues inside. Those regions that were previously considered the core no longer have a constant density. They pulsate, expand, and contract again. But this movement does not resemble the work of a star. There is no stable thermonuclear cycle here. There is only a continuous reaction of matter itself to impossible conditions of existence.
Pressure and energy no longer balance each other. They coexist in a conflict that does not lead to destruction, only because the entire structure has long ceased to be a stable system. And then, outbreaks of a completely new type begin to appear. They occur without warning and are not related to the surface. For a moment, the entire object becomes tens of times brighter, as if the internal energy is simultaneously passing through all the layers at once. After that, the glow stabilizes again, but each such impulse leaves changes. The shape of the object becomes less definite. Some areas seem to dissolve in their own radiation, turning into translucent zones where it is impossible to separate matter from light.
These processes intensify as you move through the galactic void. The less matter around, the more the object closes on its own energy. The absence of external influences no longer cools it down. On the contrary, it allows internal reactions to develop without restriction. Nothing removes heat. Nothing disturbs an unstable balance. And that's why the burning is getting deeper. Over time, a huge shell of scattered particles and energy begins to form around the object. It is not like an atmosphere or a magnetosphere. This is a trace of a constant ejection of matter that can no longer be held inside. But even after leaving the main body, these particles do not cool down completely. They continue to glow, as if the process of transformation of matter itself remains active even after separation.
This shell stretches for millions of kilometers, turning the object into something more than just a world. It begins to look like a clump of light and decaying matter floating in the void, surrounded by streams of energy that slowly rotate around the central structure. And the further the process develops, the more difficult it is to determine where the object itself ends. Some streams of energy burst out with such force that they create long, luminous plumes. They disappear into the darkness of space and gradually dissolve. But even after they disappear, traces of instability remain in space. It is as if the vacuum itself remembers the passage of these emissions.
Inside, an even stranger stage begins. Matter reaches states in which habitual atomic structures cease to exist long enough to be considered stable. Particles arise and disengage almost instantaneously, forming chaotic cascades of transformations. But in the midst of this chaos, the overall integrity of the process is preserved, as if the whole system is governed not by the laws of stability, but by the laws of continuous change. And then it becomes noticeable that the object is no longer aging. Ordinary planets are cooling. Stars lose fuel. Even the most powerful cosmic structures gradually come to a state of energy exhaustion. But the opposite is happening here. The longer this world exists, the more complex its internal processes become. It does not move towards fading. He is moving towards a deeper and deeper level of transformation.
The light becomes denser. Its radiation begins to penetrate its own shell, creating multi-layered structures of glow inside that slowly rotate and change shape. Sometimes these structures fold into huge rings of light inside the object itself, but they never remain stable. They disintegrate and form again,
like cycles within an infinite process. And at some point, there is a feeling that the very idea of a planet finally disappears. There is no longer a world or a star in front of the cosmos. In front of him is an autonomous energy organism of space, existing due to its own infinite transformation. It does not feed on light. It does not depend on the orbit. It does not even need a stable form.
Its existence becomes a separate state of matter, where energy is no longer a consequence of physical processes. It becomes the basis for the existence of the entire object. And in this endless transformation, a new phenomenon is born. Inner light begins to penetrate beyond the boundaries of matter itself, creating a thin, translucent region around the object, inside which space looks different. Absolute darkness disappears there. There, the vacuum begins to flicker with a faint glow, as if infected with the energy of this world. This area is slowly expanding, and the longer the process continues, the more clear it becomes that the object is no longer just moving through space. He gradually turns the surrounding emptiness into an extension of himself.